On the night he thought he'd finally earn a place at his family's table, Kelvin walked straight into a betrayal so calculated. It could have broken him for good. The skyline of Brightonville glowed behind him as he stepped out of the taxi, the city lights shimmering like promises yet to be fulfilled. He adjusted his dark navy suit, checked the shine on his shoes, and clutched a fine bottle of champagne in one hand, a gift for the celebration that was supposed to unite the family. But instead of honor and warmth, he would be handed a seat by the trash bin, stripped of dignity in front of strangers, and told with a smirk, "This table's for family only." Kelvin was 36 years old, the dependable one, the man who showed up on time, paid what he owed, and remembered every birthday, yet somehow was always kept at arm's length. Where are you watching from today? Kindly hit like, comment, and subscribe to this channel for more. He worked in finance at Silvergate Capital, lived alone in a modest apartment, and never asked for more than respect. His younger brother Adrian was the star, reckless, magnetic, and endlessly forgiven for mistakes that would have ruined anyone else. Kelvin had carried the family's burdens quietly for years. But tonight, at Adrian's engagement dinner, he dared to hope the years of being overlooked were finally behind him. The trouble had started weeks earlier with a phone call from their mother, Sandra. Her tone was sugar-sweet, the same one she used whenever she wanted something. She invited Kelvin to Adrian's engagement dinner, singing endless praises about the bride-to-be Lydia, calling her an absolute treasure and the daughter she'd always prayed for. Then in the same breath, Sandra asked Kelvin if he could help with the reservation. Just to secure it, she promised. She'd pay him back, of course. Kelvin knew better. He still agreed, booking a rooftop space at the Skylark in central Brightonville for 20 guests and putting down a $650 deposit without hesitation. When the night came, Kelvin arrived exactly at 7 p.m., the air crisp with a faint scent of rain. The rooftop setting was like something out of a magazine, strings of light swaying gently in the breeze, golden white floral arrangements catching the glow of candles, and the gentle hum of a live jazz trio in the corner. His chest swelled when he spotted his family already gathered. He stepped forward with a smile, ready for a warm welcome. Instead, Adrian turned to him with a grin that didn't reach his eyes and nodded toward a lonely foldable chair beside a large trash bin. "Sorry, big brother," Adrian said lightly. "This table's for family only." Kelvin froze, waiting for someone to speak up. His mother's eyes darted away, her lips pressed in a tight line. His father chuckled nervously and took a sip of wine. Lydia didn't even glance in his direction. With a deep breath, Kelvin walked over to the chair, set the champagne bottle down on the floor beside him, and kept his coat on. A young waiter approached quietly, asking if he was with the party. Kelvin nodded, but the man simply poured him a glass of water and walked away. For nearly 2 hours, Kelvin sat invisible, listening to toasts, laughter, and clinking glasses, until the bill arrived, and every head turned toward him. The bill arrived in a little leather folder, carried by the same waiter who'd given Kelvin water hours earlier. The man hesitated by the main table, glanced around, then looked down at the credit card on file. Finally, he turned toward Kelvin's lonely seat. "Excuse me, sir," he said quietly. "The total for the event is $3,480. Should I run the same card for the balance?" Every head at the main table turned. Adrian smirked and, without missing a beat, said, "Yeah, Kelvin's got it." The waiter looked at him expectantly. Kelvin felt something inside him settle. Not break, not tremble, but settle into cold clarity. He smiled slowly, deliberately, and spoke just loud enough for everyone to hear. "Not my table," he said. The air froze. Adrian's smirk faltered. Sandra blinked like she hadn't understood. His father straightened in his chair. Lydia's parents exchanged a glance. The waiter shifted uncomfortably. "Sir, you made the reservation," the man said. Kelvin nodded. "I did. And I paid the deposit. But I was told this table is for family only. I'm over there by the bin." He picked up his coat and gestured toward the trash can. A sharp, awkward silence swallowed the rooftop. Adrian leaned forward. his voice suddenly sharper. "Oh, come on, man. Don't be ridiculous. It was just a joke. Lighten up." Kelvin's mother gave a tight smile and said, "You've always been sensitive, Kelvin. Let's not blow this out of proportion." Kelvin almost laughed, the same line they'd used his whole life to dismiss him. Sensitive. Overreacting. Always turning the blame back on him instead of admitting wrong. He took a step toward the main table, his voice steady. "You think it's a joke because it's never at your expense." Lydia's father frowned, clearly not amused. "You invited your own brother and sat him by the trash?" he asked Adrian flatly. The waiter cleared his throat, breaking the tension. "I'm sorry, but we do need to process the bill before closing the tab for the private space." Nobody moved. Kelvin turned to leave. That's when his father finally spoke. "Kelvin, come on. You've already paid half. You might as well finish it." Kelvin stopped cold. He turned back, his voice low but firm. "You're right. Paid the deposit. I found this rooftop because Adrian wanted the skyline. I picked the date to avoid his football nights. I even ordered fresh flowers because Mum said fake ones would look cheap in photos. And in return, a folding chair by the garbage and a family only." Adrian stood, trying to look intimidating, but the flush on his face betrayed him. "You're making a scene," he hissed. Kelvin shook his head. "No, I'm drawing a line." He walked toward the stairs, each step deliberate, leaving the bill and years of unspoken resentment on the table. The night air hit him like a rush of freedom, sharp and bracing. He didn't know where he was headed, but he knew he wasn't going back upstairs. What he didn't yet realize was that this single moment, his refusal to be the family's safety net, would set off a chain of events that none of them could stop. Kelvin got home still in his suit, the champagne bottle unopened on his kitchen counter like a relic from a night that had gone wrong in every possible way. He replayed each moment in his head. The smirk, the trash bin, the silence from people who could have spoken up but didn't. Then his phone buzzed. First, a text from Adrian. "Bro, you couldn't have just paid and talked to me after?" Then from Sandra. "You embarrassed us in front of Lydia's whole family. Was that your goal? Revenge?" Kelvin didn't answer either. He poured himself a glass of water and let the phone buzz until it stopped. It didn't stop for long. Minutes later, an unknown number flashed across his screen. Against his better judgment, Kelvin picked up. "Hi," a soft voice said. It was Lydia. "I know we don't talk much, but can I ask you something?" Kelvin's guard went up. "Go ahead." Lydia hesitated, then asked, "Did you really pay for the flowers, the deposit, everything?" Kelvin paused. "Yes. I didn't expect anything back." Her silence spoke volumes. Then she sighed. "Adrian told my dad it was your idea, that you insisted. He's furious. He said he wouldn't have agreed to that restaurant if he'd known you were paying, especially after what they did." Kelvin didn't answer right away. Lydia added quickly, "I'm not calling to take sides. I just thought you should know." He thanked her and they ended the call. But her words rattled around in his mind. They'd not only used him, they'd twisted the story to make themselves look generous. By morning, the storm had moved to the family group chat, the same thread that usually only came alive for birthdays or Christmas. Now it lit up with messages from Sandra demanding he fix things, and from his father urging him to apologize and move on. Kelvin ignored them all. Days passed, and bits of gossip trickled in through mutual friends. One of Adrian's drinking buddies mentioned that Lydia's father had been livid the night after the dinner. "If they treat their own like that," he'd reportedly told guests at a brunch, "what happens when you marry into it?" The comment had spread like smoke. By the end of the week, whispers of tension between Adrian and Lydia were making their way through Brightonville's social circles. Wedding planning, Kelvin heard, had been quietly paused. Pinterest boards deleted. Guest lists shelved. Then came an email from Sandra. Not a text, not a call, an email. Subject line, "Please." The body was 5 paragraphs of sugar-coated damage control. She wrote about how she never meant to hurt him, how he'd misunderstood the situation, and how it would mean so much if he sat down with Adrian to smooth things over. Not once did she write the word sorry. She ended with, "Let's not let one silly night destroy the bond we've built." Kelvin stared at that line, wondering what bond she meant. The bond where he cancelled trips to bail them out. The bond where they used his savings without a thank you. Kelvin left the email unanswered. 2 days later, his Aunt Gloria called. She was Sandra's older sister. Blunt, business-minded, the type who never sugarcoated anything. "I heard about the dinner," she said without preamble. Kelvin braced himself for another lecture. Instead, Gloria surprised him. "Good. About time someone shook that tree." Kelvin blinked. "Why now?" Gloria's voice hardened. "Because now Lydia's family is involved. Sandra's in panic mode. She asked me to talk sense into you. I told her you don't need sense. You need space. And they need to learn how to function without you as their crutch." For the first time, Kelvin felt genuinely seen by someone in his family. Gloria wasn't defending Adrian. She wasn't asking him to make peace. She was acknowledging the truth, that they'd been leaning on him for too long. That night, another message from Adrian lit up his phone. "Bro, Lydia's dad just cancelled the deposit on the venue. Said we're not aligned in values. Fix this now." Kelvin stared at the screen, the absurdity of the demand almost funny. Instead of replying, Kelvin logged into the shared account he'd once opened for Adrian during a stretch of unemployment. He'd left it active out of misplaced loyalty, watching small charges for gym memberships and streaming services go through each month. That night, he transferred the remaining $2,300 into his private savings and closed the account completely. Within an hour, Adrian called him 4 times in a row. Kelvin finally answered on the 5th. "What did you do?" Adrian's voice was tight with panic. "I had plans tonight, and my card's bouncing. It says the account doesn't exist." Kelvin's reply was calm. "I closed it." Adrian's voice cracked. "You can't just—" "I can," Kelvin interrupted. "And I did. You told me I wasn't family. So you don't get to use my money if I'm not at your table." Silence. Then Adrian tried another angle. "You're just jealous. Admit it. You've always hated that I get more attention." Kelvin laughed. A sharp, genuine laugh that surprised even him. "Adrian, you think Lydia's father is on your side? He's not. And the sooner you realize that, the better." Adrian sputtered, but Kelvin didn't give him the satisfaction of a fight. "Maybe ask Mum for another credit line. Or learn to stand on your own." Then he hung up. In the quiet that followed, Kelvin felt the weight of something lift from his shoulders. Not just the shared account, but years of being the family's silent safety net. The next morning, Kelvin woke to a new email, this time from Lydia. The subject line read, "I think we need to talk." He hesitated before opening it, half expecting accusations. Instead, it was calm, measured, and laced with quiet frustration. She wrote that the dinner had opened her eyes, not just to that night's humiliation, but to deeper patterns she'd been ignoring. "Your brother told me you insisted on paying. That you sat apart because you're shy. That you left early for work," she wrote. "But I called the restaurant. The waiter told me everything. And now, I can't unsee it." She explained that her father had demanded a full invoice from the venue. Flowers, decorations, music, food. Every cent Kelvin had covered was right there in black and white. "Adrian lied," she wrote plainly. "And the way he minimized it after. I realized I've seen that before. Dismissing, twisting, avoiding responsibility." Then came the blow Kelvin didn't expect. "I ended the engagement last night." Lydia was clear it wasn't just the dinner. She'd noticed other red flags. Casual entitlement, mocking comments about Kelvin behind his back, a habit of dismissing her concerns. "He kept telling me you were overreacting," she wrote. "But the truth is, you were the only one who reacted with dignity." She ended with, "I'm not writing this to cause more drama. I just wanted you to know. See it now." And I'm sorry I didn't sooner. Kelvin read it twice, not because he doubted it, but because he wasn't used to being believed. In the weeks that followed, the family group chat went silent. Adrian didn't call again. Kelvin heard through the grapevine that he'd moved back into his parents' home, claiming he needed space while he figured things out. Lydia returned the ring. Her father sent formal cancellation notices to the venue and all vendors. Some of Adrian's friends quietly distanced themselves, realizing their connection to Lydia's influential network had evaporated. Kelvin thought that might be the end. Quiet distance, no apologies, and a fresh start for himself. But one Sunday morning, a knock at his door broke the calm. When he opened it, Sandra stood there holding a Tupperware container of lasagna like it was an olive branch. Her eyes were puffy, her makeup faint. Kelvin didn't speak. She offered a small smile. "I brought you dinner." He didn't reach for it. "I just wanted to talk." No excuses this time. He let her in. Sandra sat at his kitchen table like she used to when he was a boy, except this time there was no sharp tone, no passive-aggressive remarks. "I owe you an apology," she said. Kelvin crossed his arms. "Just one." She flinched but nodded. "Fair. Probably more than one." She took a deep breath. "I didn't see it. Not because it wasn't there, but because I didn't want to. Adrian has always been loud. He takes up space. And you never asked for anything. You just did. You handled things. We treated you like a safety net." Kelvin leaned back. "That's the thing about safety nets," he said quietly. "People only look at them when they're falling. Never when they're climbing." Sandra's lip trembled. "We let Adrian get away with too much. We let him treat you like less. I know a lasagna won't fix years of imbalance, but I wanted you to know I see it now. And I'm sorry." For the first time, she wasn't dodging or deflecting. She wasn't asking him to just let it go. He studied her for a long moment before nodding slowly. "Thank you." She didn't ask him to call Adrian. She didn't ask him to forgive anyone. She just stood, left the lasagna on the counter and said, "Take care of yourself," before walking out. Kelvin closed the door behind her, unsure if things had changed for good, but certain this was a step he'd never imagined she'd take. In the weeks that followed, his parents started messaging him individually instead of through the group thread. Short, respectful notes. Sandra invited him to Thanksgiving in 3 months, adding, "Only if you feel up to it." Kelvin hadn't decided if he would go. As for Adrian, he was back to working part-time at a tech startup he disliked, still living at home, still avoiding hard conversations. Kelvin didn't miss him. Kelvin, meanwhile, began reclaiming his life. He booked the trip to Portugal he'd postponed years earlier to cover one of his parents' emergencies. He bought himself a pair of high-quality noise-canceling headphones. He read books on boundaries, family dynamics, and quiet strength. And he started therapy, not because he was broken, but because he understood something his family never had. Healing doesn't wait for someone else's apology. It starts the moment you decide you deserve better. And give it to yourself. Kelvin's trip to Portugal was more than a holiday. It was his first taste of a life where every decision was made for himself, not for the approval or convenience of others. He wandered through Lisbon's narrow streets, drank coffee by the waterfront, and spent long afternoons in quiet bookshops. For the first time in years, he felt no urgency to check his phone, no pressure to solve someone else's crisis. The silence was not empty. It was peace. Back in Brightonville, word of his travels reached the family. Some cousins sent brief messages, polite but laced with curiosity. Adrian didn't reach out at all. Kelvin knew why. Without someone to clean up his messes, Adrian's charm had lost its shine. It was a truth Kelvin had long suspected, that when you stop giving, some people stop calling. One evening, Kelvin received a call from Aunt Gloria. "I heard about your trip," she said. "Good. Spend your money on yourself for once." Kelvin chuckled. "It feels strange, but good strange." Gloria's voice softened. "Strange means you're not used to it yet. Keep going until it feels normal." Her words lingered long after they ended the call. He returned home to find a letter in his mailbox. It was from Lydia. Short, handwritten, and warm. She wrote that she'd started over too. Moved to a new flat, joined a community art group, and taken a break from dating. I thought losing the wedding would break me, she wrote. But sometimes, the end of something rotten is the start of something honest. Kelvin smiled as he folded the letter away. In the months that followed, Kelvin's boundaries grew roots. When his father asked for help paying a utility bill, Kelvin replied politely but firmly, "I can't this time. You'll need to work it out." The line went quiet but no argument came. When Sandra hinted about needing a lift to the market, Kelvin offered to order her a taxi instead. She accepted without protest. Slowly, the unspoken expectation that he would always say yes began to fade. Adrian's life, however, was another story. He bounced between jobs, showing up late or leaving early. Lydia's father made it clear his door was closed. The easy money and free rides were gone. And though Kelvin didn't take pleasure in his brother's struggles, he didn't rescue him either. For the first time, Adrian was standing or stumbling entirely on his own. One Saturday morning, Kelvin walked past the Skylark rooftop while running errands. He glanced up at the warm glow of its string lights and thought of that night, the humiliation, the silence, the bill he refused to pay. Instead of bitterness, he felt gratitude. That was the night he'd stopped being the family's safety net. The night he'd stepped out of the shadow of a table he was never meant to sit at. In his therapist's office later that week, Kelvin spoke openly about the dinner for the first time. "It wasn't the chair by the bin," he said slowly. "It was the years before it, the way they decided my place without asking me." His therapist nodded. "So you changed the seating chart?" Kelvin smiled. "Exactly." By spring, Kelvin's life was full in ways it hadn't been before. He joined a weekend cycling group, started cooking classes, and even began mentoring a young colleague at Silvergate Capital. His days were no longer about managing other people's emergencies. They were about building something for himself. Sandra noticed the change. When they met for coffee one afternoon, she said quietly, "You seem lighter." Kelvin sipped his drink. "I am." She hesitated. "Do you think we'll ever be the same again?" Kelvin met her gaze. "No. But maybe we can be something better, if we both want it." She nodded slowly, as if she understood the weight of his words. The extended family still had gatherings, though Kelvin attended only when he felt like it. When he did, he noticed something. The jokes at his expense had stopped. The casual digs were gone. People were careful now, not fearful but aware. It was as if the invisible script had been rewritten. Adrian, still restless, tried once to bring up the dinner. "You really made a scene," he muttered at a barbecue. Kelvin didn't rise to it. "Or maybe I just made a choice." Adrian rolled his eyes but said nothing more. And that, Kelvin realized, was its own kind of victory. One late evening, Kelvin sat on his balcony watching the city lights of Brightonville stretch into the distance. He thought about the boy he used to be, the one who believed that showing up, paying, and staying quiet would eventually earn him a seat at the family's table. That boy had been patient, loyal, hopeful, and wrong. The truth was simple. The table had never been built for him. And waiting for an invitation had cost him years he could have spent building his own. The night at the Skylark had simply shown him, in the sharpest way possible, that his place was never next to the bin. It was at a table of his own making. He thought of Lydia's letter, of Aunt Gloria's blunt encouragement, of Sandra's apology, and realized something important. Change doesn't happen when the people around you finally see your worth. It happens when you do. By early summer, Kelvin's balcony had become his favorite place. He'd host small dinners with close friends, people who valued him without condition. They'd sit for hours under the glow of string lights, talking about travel, books, and the future. The laughter was genuine, the company warm, and not once did anyone need rescuing. When one friend remarked, "You've got a good life here," Kelvin smiled. "I do. And it's mine." He knew some would say he'd grown distant from his family. But in truth, he'd simply stopped letting them decide how close they could stand without crushing him. Adrian's story remained tangled, occasional part-time work, bursts of charm that faded quickly. But Kelvin no longer measured himself against his brother. He no longer carried the weight of proving anything to anyone. That freedom, he realized, was worth more than all the deposits he'd ever paid. On the anniversary of that fateful dinner, Kelvin walked past the Skylark again. The rooftop glowed just as it had a year ago. But this time he didn't look up with anger or sadness. He looked up with gratitude, thinking, "That was the night I stopped waiting for permission to belong." And so the folktale ends not with a grand reunion, but with something far rarer. A man who, after years of being everyone's safety net, finally stepped off the edge and built his own solid ground. In Brightonville, people still whispered about the dinner where the eldest son refused to pay. But to Kelvin, it wasn't about the bill. It was about finally cashing in years of silent debt, to himself. And in the quiet of his own table, under the glow of his own lights, he knew he would never sit beside the trash again.